All right, good morning. 9 a.m. Friday, March 8th. This is the Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order to acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. We've got almost all committee members here. Cindy and Scott are via Zoom with us. Thank you guys for joining us. So today, committee wanted to pause after the first four meetings and just kind of recap what we've heard, talk about next steps and directions that we may want to talk about, who we want to have come in next. So just kind of a quick recap of from which we've come in very quick 30 days or so. First meeting was just ground setting to some extent, putting the goals of the committee out there. We had Steve Tranum here to give us some history on the beach and renourishments and kind of their view of life from CSE. Next meeting, we talked about kind of the current state of affairs, if you will, from a financial standpoint, the current beach preservation fund, the flow of money into that fund, cost of projects. So really, that was more of a financial conversation. Then we had OCRM in, Matt Slagle from OCRM talking about their view of life and their jurisdiction, as well as Steve had joined us at that session also. And last week, a really good session. Thank you, Douglas and Desiree, for putting that together with Bobby Outen from the Dare County Manager in Outer Banks, talking about what they had done from a funding project standpoint for Dare County in North Carolina. Again, very, very interesting. So a lot of information in 4 meetings. Great guest speakers, great level setting, I think, for folks to get to a certain spot. And I think it was a good time to pause. Just real quick, I'll tell you, one of the next groups we wanted to have in was the Army Corps of Engineers. I think they will have everything approved next week to be ready. I don't think they'll be ready next Friday, but probably later in the month, they'll be ready to have a conversation with us about what that would look like for the Army Corps to take over management of our beaches. So we may plan that for the end of the month, just to give them a little more time. I think they were having a session on the 12th or 13th to finalize their presentation, be ready to bring it to us. So that's kind of where we are, and we had a whole nother list of other things or people we might want to bring in, but I'll just pause there and let the committee kind of take the conversation wherever we want to go. So, morning, Katie.
Well, I'll speak first.
Go.
So as we've taken in all this information, I kind of look at it as we're trying to frame this public policy. We want to look at it 2 parts, a proactive piece and a reactive part. So we have a funding that we've developed, but we haven't set kind of guidelines for it. So we want to look at how do we want to proactively take care of the beach and nourish it. And then in times of emergency and other issues, whether it be a named storm or a non-named storm, have a reactive policy and define what those expectations are for the community. Because I think there was money set aside in the past, but without defined expectations for how it would be used, when it would be used, and to what end would it be used, if that makes sense. As we look to define what our problem is and what we're trying to create a solution for, or create what solution we're trying to create. With that, obviously each part of that puzzle, I look at it with, we're looking at the funding and where does the funding come from and how do we develop it and who are all the users and who are the stakeholders at the beach. Obviously, as a community, as the city of Isle of Palms, we are a primary stakeholder, but the state is a stakeholder too, and obviously has set guidelines for us. So without funding for it, so us trying to find those avenues to create a robust funding source to be able to take care of these two sides of this policy issue. So I think that's the next steps of the puzzle, is figuring out what's our proactive policy look like, what's our reactive policy look like, so we have those clearly defined expectations. And then using the information that we've gotten from like the folks up there at Dare County, how do we fund it, and how much is it going to take today and in the future as well?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that we do, I hope anyway, I think that we do have the framework of some of that already within the administration department. What triggers what, when can we act in certain circumstances, and, when are we just essentially in a holding pattern? But, that might be the difference between the proactive and the reactive. We're here until we're here, and just getting all of that information about our permitting processes, the different triggers for when we can act and when we can't, maybe onto our beach restoration page, maybe it's a separate tab. Beach management as opposed to like the restoration tab that's more of kind of a timeline, a chronology of all of our activities, so that anybody can look out there and say, okay, well, there are 4 permits in process, but nothing can happen in this stretch, as I understand it, until we hit this trigger. Just getting more clear information out publicly, I think would be very helpful at the end of this, so we end up not just with a report that ends up in minutes, but is, an active policy of this municipality that is there for the world to see.
Well, I'd like to add, the meeting last week was great because we saw how another community is handling a similar problem down the coast. And, one of the things that we have to figure out is, do we have to reinvent the wheel, or can we follow the protocol somebody else is doing? And I like the fact that they've got a routine, repeated program. It's going to cost them less money sometimes, depending on how much erosion there is, and more other times. But at least they've set up a time frame. It was 4 or 5 years, and a funding program. They created a mechanism where they would charge the residents X amount depending on where they were in proximity to the beach. There was a little bit of a sliding scale, and it seems to me that one thing that we want to look at, and I talked to Desiree briefly afterwards because I left the meeting a few minutes early, is I think we should mirror that for purposes of evaluating it. And I think that we should figure out, if we followed their scheme exactly, what would it look like for our residents? Once we have that cost, if it's exorbitant, which I'm guessing it probably will be, at least we then have something to talk to the state about, and to say, if we follow a program that's working in North Carolina and we contribute similarly to what they're contributing, the shortfall is X, and that's what we need to recoup it. And that's a lot better than going and saying, we want you to help us with a problem. At least now we can follow something that works. And I think that's something that my thought is, that's the next step for us to do, is to figure it out. And I'd like to have those numbers, frankly, if we can, before we go to the Corps of Engineers, before they come to meet with us, so that now we're comparing different solutions with each other, because we're going to need it anyhow. And we could extend it 5 years or 10 years, but the reality is, why don't we follow exactly what they did and compare it and see how it works out? That's 100 miles of beach they had to deal with. Ours is a lot smaller. They've got different protocols. They don't have any state involvement. We do have state involvement, or at least we have historically. And I think if we do that, we might hopefully find ourselves pleasantly surprised. But if not, the sticker price will at least give us some information that we can evaluate to understand, and we can use when we talk to the state or we talk to the legislators about needing help.
Or even the public. I mean, it puts a real dollar amount on the challenge that we face, as opposed to everybody thinking, well, I mean, how, you get money from rentals, or you get 1%, or you get but if the 1% is fabulous, I'm glad we have the beach preservation fee. It's very helpful. It's helped us with our accesses. It's helped us with our emergency scraping. But, if it's 1/10 of what we need annually, I mean, we got to figure out where we are, exactly to your point, yes.
I would add, I think, go ahead, Cindy.
Cindy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and this comes from me being new to this, is in order to do that, we need a general plan to get the economics of it. And I don't know if do we have that? Do we know that we need let's say it's a 5-year renourishment, and that renourishment involves this and takes into account the shoal and takes into account the 2 inlets, and here is what our plan would look like in order to price it out. Again, I haven't seen, and that would be something, whether North Carolina has something they can share of how that looks. And, I assume that's something you hire, either we have or we hire a consultant who puts together, this is what our beach in an ideal world needs. This is what the pricing would be. This is the type of dredge we would need. I don't know, I assume we don't have that yet.
So we have CSC under contract for annual monitoring and surveying of the beach, and that provides information about how the different reaches of our beach, how they're eroding and the erosion rate for each of those. And, they're very different. And that would be information that would guide what we would need to do if we say we want at all times, when feasible, to have X number of feet of dry sand beach. And then depending on the erosion rate for those areas, here's the schedule that we would need to follow, taking into account just the normal erosion rate, plus potential storms, nor'easters, what is our expectation of what the beach needs to look like, and then taking into account the different variables. What do we need to do? How often? What areas would need to be more frequent? And that would then guide the funding discussion of how much would we need to maintain that goal. That exercise has not really been done that I understand. I think that the information is available because it's something that we actively monitor and survey. But this idea of the community saying this is what we always want to have or what we aspire to have, we haven't set that up.
I guess
What would it take to do, can we go to CSC and say, can you all come up with I look at it as kind of a worst case scenario pricing, because, we price it so that we've got this shoal sitting out here, and if we price it so that, assuming that the shoal doesn't attach, right? And then if we've got our equipment going or whatever, and the shoal decides to attach, it's like, woo, Christmas.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel like it kind of needs to be.
And I would-
Professionals, that would be the goal, getting someone to put this plan together would say that. They would give us this is what we could expect with the shoal.
yeah.
But even looking at the report, and Tim, thank you, that information you sent was really helpful. Desiree, thanks for sharing it. But, they have things in there where, we thought we would only have to nourish it every 5 years, but this needed at 7 and this needed at 3. So I assume there'll be footnotes of someone who does this. And similarly, the next step would be, it looks like adding in the economics, of our island. We have X number of plats, we have this much of a tax base, like having it all put together at some point. But it seems like a starting point is what do we want to be a healthy beach, and what do we need to stay there?
I do want to
And like
clarify.
you said, Katie, worst case scenario with the money, we absolutely want to know I agree with you.
Well, and it got more complicated because last week he said that they saved $12 million on the bid by giving a flexible time period.
Yeah.
So I think all we can do is start with the worst case and then back it out.
Yeah. I do want to clarify that, so we've had,
Bobby had mentioned that they have a consultant that basically built their model. Models are built on assumptions and I think, Dan, to your point, instead of recreating the wheel, perhaps we take a look or ask them if they can potentially get us the background for their assumptions and their modeling. And I don't know, maybe do they use CSC as their consultants? Maybe this is something.
They did. I know CSC has worked with them. I do want to clarify, just looking at the historical timeline for the Isle of Palms, we have a very clear understanding for the north end of the island, which has been erosional for a long, long, long time. So we do know that we have to nourish that area. We understood, every 10 years, and that's how our model was laid out. We did a project in 2008. We did a medium-term project in 2012 with a shoal management that added life to that original project. We knew that by 2018, we were going to need another large-scale offshore project. After that, the shoal management project that's under, the permit application is being worked on today. So for the north end of the island, because it's been highly erosional and it's considered an engineered beach, we do have that model of what we expect and how the sand is how much we lose sand and how much we would need to do in order to restore that area. Every other area of the island, except for the north end, has been relatively stable and accretional. So that's, I think, that the deficiency of what we have is what we've seen over the last year or two is just different. It's just new. And I think that is putting us in a position to say, how do we mimic the model that we had for the north end of the island everywhere else?
But the model at the north end of the island is not working. because it's not making it the time period you wanted
Correct.
it to work.
And that's,
So one thought is that by having a recurring 5-year program, at least to consider what they're doing or whatever the time period is, maybe it'll cost us money when we don't necessarily have to spend it, but in the big scheme of things, we might be saving money
correct.
by not having emergency repairs.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out too, in terms of the city's posture with emergency work, the city has stepped in situations when we've had a named storm. But, you know, whether it's written or not, but this, historically, the city's posture on individual work has been, it's up to the individual property owner. If you look at the amount of money that some of the property owners in Wild Dunes has spent in emergency protective measures, that was not something that the city has ever participated in. That posture changed last year when council, you know, had discussions about what was happening at Breach Inlet and said, no, the city needs to step in when these properties that are under an emergency condition. But that was the first time that city took that
Well, and
posture.
I think, I mean, perhaps, I'm not sure this is the truth, but it seems to me that in a stretch of beach that's publicly inaccessible, that's in an emergency situation, that might be a little different for the city per se than a fully publicly accessible stretch of beach. That may have been part of the determination, and I'm not certain that when you say the posture changed, I mean, I'm not certain that was, I mean, that's, again, is part of the challenge of our beach, is that we have accessible and inaccessible, fully open to all sorts of funding, limited in ways. And so it's a little bit of a challenge, you know, to protect everybody in the same way, because the model will be a little different on the north end than it would be for the rest of our beach.
But I guess to what I was trying to say at the beginning there with the proactive and reactive policy, like having defined policies and expectations, we don't have a defined reactive policy. We don't have, this is expectation, so all citizens understand this is what we're going to do, and then there's a limit or a cap to it, because any emergency situation can become an unlimited event, and there has to be an end game and an end state that we have to define.
But I think that's what they did. By creating this short window of repeating it, they don't have emergency situations. I think that's,
We're
and
talking
that's,
about Dare County.
yeah, that's how they've resolved it, at least so far.
Yeah,
And I don't know how I mean, we can come up with a million different ways to look at this thing. I mean, there's no roadmap for it, but I think that at the very beginning, we compare it to what's working, and we run the numbers, and we calculate it to see if we followed that protocol, are we ahead of the game as opposed to having emergency repairs? Or is it cheaper and as effective to just push up sand until we can recreate it? But we have to compare it to something.
Douglas.
Yeah, I do think Dare,
Hang on, Cindy.
Oh, sorry, Douglas.
Yeah, let me let Douglas in here.
so Dare County definitely has emergency
Absolutely.
conditions. They're losing houses into the surf. So, I mean, I don't know I wasn't here for that, but
That was in a part of the beach they weren't protecting, that they're now protecting, is what
No.
you said.
They have
Yeah, they're in the middle of
Yeah,
an
they-
emergency issue right now.
Or they have to push off a project
That
because
was
they don't have
in
the
park
funding.
area where they couldn't do it, I think, is what you
No.
said.
No.
no, they're
You've
losing.
left at
If
that
it
point.
doesn't last long enough, they just lose the house.
Well, I think what happens, I think my understanding of what he said is, because I believe Scott asked the question, is this a policy that has served you well for, I mean, have you never had an emergent situation? And he said, no, we actually have one now in a community to the south. And they're not scheduled for another 3 years. But we have a community in the north that thinks they can get another 3 years out of their sand, they're hoping. But in the interim, the private citizens are kind of just holding the line with their private funds until they can get that thing, until they can, you know, do the shell game of getting the funding and stuff around to get to them.
I think what he added was that if they look at the amount of reserves they have, based on when the next schedule is going to take place.
Yes.
And if they have enough reserves that they can afford to do the repairs, they do.
Yeah.
If they don't, they don't. So it's like everything needs to be flexible. You
Yeah.
got to take a look, but you first got to start with the protocol, and then from there grow.
You
with
got to
it.
know what you're
Yeah,
doing.
hey, let me, Cindy, go ahead.
No, thank you. Everything, this is so helpful, by the way. Thank you. I'm glad we're talking about this, but it seems again that we need to be defining in order to get there what we need. Like in looking at what Tim sent, we need to define like what is our beach width? Like what is our goal? What is the economic value of whether our beach is a 50-foot beach or a 20-foot beach? And I mean, it seems like a consultant could come in and hopefully maybe they've got someone you know, either we've already got them or it's someone in North Carolina they could recommend who could kind of say, okay, well, we plug in these numbers, here's what we come out with for this. And they also do a good job, it appeared in what I read with Tim's, is identifying, you know, how many properties do you have on your beach each year that are in danger. You can predict that. You know, and there's just some moving parts that would be good to have knowledgeable. We need to know what our, as a city, what our overall goal is, as regards what preservation, where the economics work. So it just seems like we could use, I guess in short, the assistance of a professional who would align with the goals of this island, understanding that we are small, we aren't Myrtle Beach, we aren't hotel based, which limits our, you know, the taxes. So then we can start looking at funding. But no, I mean, we've got so much great information, it's almost overwhelming right now of where to start. But I think we need to know what we're looking for, and then determining what we actually, as a small island, can attain. And Desiree, I agree wholeheartedly. We have a lot of information on the north, but we need to know what our role is there and the whole island. So there's no misunderstanding when someone purchases a piece of property. You know, they're not calling you saying, hey, here's the bulldozer. It's like, no, you need to look at this. This is what we're doing. We're here to help here, but we can't help in this way. Or we're on our way, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. The first step in this process is identifying what the expectation is for the beach to look like from the north to the end. And I think that is information that would be plugged into a model and say, okay, in order to maintain that, barring any unprecedented storm event or nor'easter or something that, you know, it's unpredictable, we know it'll happen. It's just a matter of when. Here's how much you have to do every year, or every 5 years, or every 3 years. And we can, you know, easily say, okay, this is estimated to be X, and what can we afford to do every year?
Do you think we can get that information and numbers in the next, probably not the next meeting, but like in a soon, you know, because I do feel like we've kind of nailed down like what we're looking for, and I'm looking to buy a car for my daughter right now. So I mean, it's kind of like before you hit the lot, you need to know how much money you got in your pocket, how much money the car costs, like, right? I mean, so I kind of feel like we're all sitting here saying like, well, wouldn't it be nice if X, Y, but we need to know what we feasibly could do, and or, you know, here's a number, and then it's how do we get to that number?
And can I speak? Sorry, Tim, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
And to what Desiree was saying, it's like we define what our expectation is. What do we want the beach to look like? Then from there, we get the costing structure.
Yeah.
You have to define what you want, and then figure out the cost. Like you said, figure out what car you're looking for, and then evaluate, does this fall within the budget, the parameters of what we need?
But I
To
think
use that analogy.
the engineers can give us a better idea of, I mean, you know, 200 yards of dry sand would be great, but like what is realistic
If it's
and
50, we
needed?
need
You
to
know, like if you have 50 yards, then that gets you through. You know, like that's kind of the
Based off the erosion rates and things
right.
like that. I
I
got
mean,
you.
there's math. You
So
know,
we
and then
kinda-
there's the 50-year storm that just we have to
Throws
just
it all off.
Right.
I mean, I would say we kind of have placeholders in our 10-year capital plan now, you know, that project, it has all of these projects in it. The numbers, in my mind, are very much kind of placeholders. They're high. They have a little shock value of where's all this going to come from. But I think we could kind of maybe identify somebody to work on that schedule of cost, see if it's, you know, kind of verify that it's somewhere in the ballpark. And then I think I'm hearing work backwards. Once we know that total amount over time, work backwards with the funding of how to get there and how do we, I mean, it does seem like the parts are kind of there. They're not polished, and they're, quite frankly, eye-popping, the cost and the lack of finances elsewhere, you know? So
well-
that might be a good starting point, is to just hire somebody to work on that schedule and refine it a bit.
Right.
Well, I apologize for Desiree and Douglas. Some of the stuff is new to me, but you guys have been through this before. So bear with me if some of my ideas we've already done. But, I've kind of thought that we really need to get going on this. We can talk about it all day long, but we really need to get moving. And, one of my things is to request from the state, the DHAC and OCRM, to pause their redrawing of the new lines. Let's go back to the 2018 lines and give property owners a chance to regroup and relax and get their insurance updated and maybe assess what they want to do with their property with a little more time. It seems like everything is rushed, and they're not making the best decisions. So I think we do that. Ask for funding from the state and expedite the permitting process. I know this has been done before. I know they don't want to give it to us, but I feel like we need to have something on paper that we can go to. Look, we requested all this stuff, and you didn't give it to us. So now, this is just like with H40. The governor said he had no letter or no direction from the city on what to do with that, so he just signed the bill ahead. So we need to have something in writing in the state legislature, into the governor's office, that's saying this is what we want, this is what we need, and then let it go from there. And then once we get all that paperwork in there, the letter's gone, then we can step back and say what we need to do. And like you said before, we need to establish how much dry beach we need or want, whether it be 200 yards, 500 yards, whatever it is. I say the more the better. I mean, we're getting more and more people come out to the beach. It makes more sense to expand it, to have more room for people. And then once we do that, we need to find a reliable income source. And that might be a special tax district. Redirect more money from the A-tax money. We can maybe get license plates where it says save the beach on it instead of save the turtle. Just all sorts of little bit of money coming in that we can add to the kitty. And then I really think we need to, as a city, establish a position to handle all this. I mean, Douglas, your guys' plates are full. I mean, you guys have a lot of stuff to do. And this is very time consuming with the permitting and dealing with engineers and getting homeowners. Hire someone to do that so they can manage those funds coming in, look for programs and grants, and have constant contact with our state officials. And remember, another thing is, this would be a great example to exercise our home rule. We've been, H40, they kind of came in and walked all over us, SCDOT. Now it's DHAC and OCRM. So I think we need to take our responsibility or whatever and take control of what we can do to our beach with what we have available as far as funding and get it done that way. But I really think that time is of the essence. We're losing beach. We're going to lose more beach this spring and summer. And if we don't get something in the pipeline, fairly quickly, it's just going to keep compounding and it's going to get worse.
Maybe I think to that end, it would be helpful to talk about the permitting, the work that the city is currently undergoing. In addition to the emergency protective measures that we've been working on for the past several months, on the north and the south end of the island, City Council last year engaged CSC to begin the permitting process for the shoal management project on the north end. We've expanded that to include an inlet management program for the breach inlet side, and also begin the permitting process for the large-scale offshore projects, both on the north and the south end, but by identifying, working with State Historic Preservation Office, identifying the borough areas where that sand is going to come from. So those sort of four connected processes are in flux currently with our consultant. One thing that we talked about we talked to Stephen about this week is doing another survey of the breach inlet end, just because of all the changes that have happened in the past several months. That'll help us identify exactly where we are currently in terms of sand volumes and the beach profiles. And that's something that we'll bring forward to council next week to authorize funds to do another survey. We typically do it every year. We feel like because of the dynamics on that end, it's important to do it again.
CSE, they've done projects down in Kiowa, 2015 through channel realignment, and also down in Seabrook for a inlet relocation in the long term. So I think they're capable of giving us a plan pretty quickly if you wanted to take sand from the inlets and from offshore deposits as well. So locating all those sources and getting something going is so we can have a management plan instead of just goals to get there.
Well, and just,
Have
let's
we
manage
talked
it.
to Sullivan's? I mean, are we in communication with Sullivan's? I feel like that's something that we need to before we obviously talk about that.
From
inlet.
what standpoint, they love our sand, yeah.
I mean,
Right.
well, I mean, I'm just,
Beautiful forest over there.
yeah, well, let's not go there.
Well, we know that.
But is there someone that we can, do we need to formally make some sort of, alliance or, I don't know, or if it's just talking with them, is there, I know we communicate with them on other things, but are we?
So as part of this beneficial use project with the Army
know,
Corps of
yeah.
Engineers, as you all know, they're gonna be placing some sand on the Sullivan's Island, about 200,000 cubic yards of sand. So Stephen and CSC are working really closely with Sullivan's on that, and Nicole Elko, who is the president of the South Carolina Beach Advocates group, which is representing Sullivan's Island. So there is a I don't know if I would call it formal, but there is a very real ongoing conversation with Sullivan's Island, because they are experiencing some hotspots of erosion as well. And how do we mitigate those and work together to try to, have a plan that makes sense for both of them. So I think this beneficial use project has solidified a lot of those conversations. So going forward, I think it would be much easier to incorporate them in that, a broader plan.
I want to go back to something Tim said, and you raised some great points. Thank you. We know because we're paying attention right now, and people that are watching this or reading it are paying attention, but most people kind of ignore it and really don't really know what's happening. And that's people that live on the beach where we're really being impacted. If we take it up to Columbia, to the legislature, it's even less known, and they just figure it's our problem, we should be able to resolve it. And I think that, to your point about the fact the governor didn't know our position, I don't know if we have a lobbyist on the island or if we have somebody who's working with them. We do. Apparently, there's a lot of found money right now in the state, and I think that we need to be very active to make sure they understand how significant the problem is. OCRM is a governmental unit, but it doesn't report back to the legislators or the governor necessarily. And I think that maybe it's a good time to take a very proactive stance with the state and make sure they're aware of how dire the situation is. And I think that getting these numbers and doing it in an urgent manner would be helpful.
Yeah, let's just level set a little bit. There is no lack of knowledge or information at the state level of what the issue is. Zero. The numbers, the lack of funding sources, there is no more proactivity work, I'm telling you, we can do at the state level to make this known. It is widely known at state legislator house.
They just don't care.
They don't care. We've got lobbyists that we just hired 2 years ago for the first time ever, and have probably gotten $3-4 million out of the state on various things. I mean, that has totally changed our dynamics from a financial standpoint. So I feel like we're there, on the lobbyist effort. We didn't have them when, S40 came along, certainly would have helped, but right after that, we put them in place. So, again, just to manage expectations, to get going, Tim, we've got going. We've been going for months on this thing, and months on permitting. There is, again, just to manage expectations, there is nothing that's going to happen this year absent the Army Corps project. I mean, we can push and pull and do everything we can. We've got permit applications in, and then we'll be a nice game of sit and wait on it. So that there's, again, just managing expectations. There's not going to be a renourishment project this year other than the Army Corps project. If that shoal attaches, awesome. We'll be ready to pull that in and make that happen, but that's a Mother Nature issue that's going to happen. So there's a lot of pieces in play and a lot of things happening, kind of to your point, everybody's getting up to speed on it. Thank goodness. That's why it's great to bring in residents to this committee and this conversation to make sure everybody is on the same page, because if you don't know we have lobbyists, if you don't know we've gotten, buckets of money from the state over the last 2 or 3 years, you don't know that, and you don't know that we've got 3 permits or whatever that's sitting in, OCRM at this point. So I feel like a lot of the pieces are there and a lot of things are happening that may or may not have been happening in prior years, but I think our lobbyists have done a great job for us so far. It'd been great to have them, 3 years ago when some of this other stuff was going on, for sure.
And I also want to mention, preparing a permit, it's not just filling, portions of a form. There's a lot of engineering that needs to happen as part of those permits. So that's why they take a long time. It's a very robust engineering initiative. So in terms, I think, managing expectations, if people understanding that it's a long process.
I think just to jump in here, I think this was mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was maybe Andrew or somebody else, the whole communication aspect of what we're doing. Desiree just mentioned 4 permits that are in flight. I would venture that most people aren't necessarily aware of what those permits are, when they're expected to initiate as far as the repairs or the renourishments for the shoal management, and what I think even more importantly is what's going to be the expected outcome. So these are things that I think we can do, a little bit more to get the word out as to what is currently in flight. And the same thing with the Army Corps of Engineer project. We've got a couple of delays on that, and it sounds like, Phil, we're going to get an update within a week or so. But the big uncertainty here is when they come and they drop the 550,000 cubic yards on our beach, somewhere on our beach, what is the expected outcome? What are the people at the south end going to actually enjoy or not enjoy as far as repair to the beach? And what is that expected outcome? Are we going to have 50 yards of dry sand? We're going to have 100 yards of dry sand. So these are things I think we can do more to make sure that we're getting the word out to the community.
Yeah, I feel like what we're looking at, what we're talking about with the pricing and having this, however many yards of dry sand is more of a long-term, 10, 20 years out type. I mean, this is not tomorrow, unfortunately. I mean, we are where we are, and we can't go back in time. And I think on the south end, we had a little bit of a perfect storm type event. But at the same time, I mean, when those lots were sold, there's a reason why the beach company put that buildup line in there. They didn't do it because they didn't want to sell more property. They did it because they knew that there was an ocean out there that was going to cause a problem at some point. I mean, I think we've kind of just been lucky, or maybe it's cyclical or whatever, but, we do need to acknowledge the fact that these areas have historically been an issue, and when they are going to continue to be. But if we can come up with some sort of plan that can get us onto it's a little bit of a regular program, 10 years from now, we might be in a better place than we are now.
Douglas, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I've not been a part of a budgeting discussion yet at a council level. And so this question, I may be an idiot, but is these eye-popping numbers that are in our budget, were just for the north, or was this like a whole island wide? If we had to renourish the entire stretch of our beach, this is the number?
Yeah, well, it kind of assumes that the Wild Dunes projects would be funded at the same kind of distribution that they've historically happened. Mm-hmm. We get, Stephen is constantly monitoring. He'll say, that's currently on 8 years out. According to the monitoring, that probably needs to get shifted to 6 years out. So it's kind of island-wide. It's assuming a lot of funding, kind of historical funding, will trickle down in the same way it traditionally has. But it's still very much kind of a straw man or skeleton of a plan that from my perspective, if we really, it would be a good place, because we have this unknown funding of the southern end. We're kind of assuming the northern end funding will continue to hold. We have this unknown method of how are we going to do the southern end. It would at least be a good basis to have that conversation. Let's just say, I think it's 17 million is in there currently. 17 million, in a couple years, and then repeat that every 7, 8 years. We can get that kind of refined. But that at least gives us, and I think, Dan, you said, kind of gives us the number that we then need to start working towards as to how do we get there. We can look at what's at the state level. I mean, I think we know it's currently nothing. I mean, close to nothing. We can look at what's at the federal level. We know that if there's a named storm, we'll get a chunk, but that's kind of luck of the draw.
And even
but we could be prepared for that.
Clarify on the named storm. It depends when we have a named storm and an emergency declaration. Not all buckets of funding are approved. For example, we had Hurricane Idalia in August, September of last year. The only category of funding that was authorized by the federal government for that event was Category B, which was emergency protective measures. So in that perspective, we can submit and request reimbursement for the immediate action the city took to protect these areas. Pumping of water, roads, sandbagging, the sand that we put in the parking lot. And historically, we've received funding for the initial berm restoration that has been done. And that we did that in 2016 and 2017 after the 2 respective storms. But the Category G, which is a category that makes funds available for restoring portions of the beach that got, or parks, it's a general beaches and parks and other type of facilities, that funding was not authorized as part of that hurricane. So we're limited, even in a named storm, we're limited in what the city is eligible to receive from FEMA. We were able to receive FEMA funding for the last Wild Dunes project because that category had been authorized as part of those named storms. So that's
It also worked. The timing happened to be perfect where we had done the engineer. I mean, we were about to start a project anyway. So it was like just good luck that we had this, we had all the engineering, it was all ready to go. We then had this event. We then got an additional pot of funding because of a storm. So it was a lot of pieces had to line up for that to happen to get the federal contribution that we got.
I have a question on that permitting. It might be, can you reuse the same permit information to file for another permit? Or do you have to go through the whole process again?
Some things, but the permit is good for 5 years, so a lot changes within 5 years. So there's just a lot of new data that would have to be collected.
Okay. We have had, kind of to that point, the shoal management projects that we've been able to get approved. We can include in there triggers that if a shoal gets within X amount of feet, that would then allow us to go get it. And that was the way the Wild Dunes shoal management permit worked, is it had these triggers. And we've talked about that would be the structure we would want to do again. If a shoal comes this close, we kind of know and we can assume it's coming ashore, it's going to do damage, but we'd like to proactively be able to go out there and mechanically pull it in instead of having nature do it. So we can have those permits are somewhat kind of a rolling permit that we can do work when these triggers get met.
Could you trigger if the dunes disappear?
I don't think so. I mean, shoal management specifically, is a recognized thing when there's a big amount of sand that's naturally going to come anyway. I mean, I think the dunes disappearing gets back into that emergency category in the state's eyes, and you have to meet that 20 feet, the 20-foot triggers.
So circling back around to how we started with this, is there any reason we can't use kind of the numbers that Douglas has at this point, the projected numbers, and calculate it out based on a time frame similar to North Carolina, understanding that we probably may go to a 7 or 8, but why don't we just follow their protocol, see what it works with, and then from there go?
Kind of
Yeah.
just
Can
use
we-
the.
I think to your question, there's no reason we can't. I mean, I did a very elementary financial model this week. It's not that hard, quite honestly. I mean, you got money in, money out, guesstimate of when you're gonna spend that money and the funding sources. So I mean, I think we could very easily do
And
that.
if we follow their protocol with the residents covering it, which I know we can't feasibly do, but if we follow it, then from there we can figure out what do we have to do to reduce that down to get the monies elsewhere, whether it's to consider the 1% or consider something else, and at least it drives us down the road of understanding it. Can we do that in the next couple of weeks before, or next week before the meeting? Is that possible?
I will
Probably not
say
next
not
week.
next week. We're in the middle of budgeting.
Yeah.
Preparing the budget and preparing for a workshop, but that's certainly something, we started just working on it this week with the mayor, and we can try to have a close
We can just
enough
work
model.
towards it,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just trying to understand kind of, because there's nothing else, there's no other model that we know of,
Yeah.
at least to see if that's just so far away from anything we can do, we have to recreate.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, to your question, Desiree and I've had a conversation. I mean, I want to do a follow-up with Dare County, to dig around on their model a little bit, see what they'll share with us, to Cindy's comment too, and, kind of go from there. Again, it's just a financial model. It's really not that hard. You're plugging in numbers that we have out there. It's going to be eye-popping. I mean, it's going to be earth-shattering at a resident level.
And they treated it, they don't have an intercoastal waterway that really plays a role with them.
Correct.
So they just did it off the beach only. And I don't know if we do it differently or not, and we can.
So it's different. So their county is, we talked to the county manager. Then there are about 6 or 7 local municipalities that they would be more aligned to what, our current model. So different municipalities have different models on how to come up with their 50% share. The county covers half of it, then so there are municipalities that I believe, have a special tax purpose district over the people that live on the first row of homes. There are others that, include everybody at different percentages at different rates. So there are just multiple models, I think, that we could evaluate and model after. I think too, very different from, I guess, how the city has financed projects in the past that we could look at is issuing bonds. We heard from them how their model assumes, a 5-year bond term, and that works with their renourishment maintenance model. Do we want to look at that as well? And that may be much more feasible to come up with the funds to cover a debt service in 5-10 years, or whatever our schedule or timeline would be. That would be different, but certainly an option that I think we should certainly consider if that's what makes it more palatable.
What about Charleston County? Are they,
We felt like the Dare
we do live
County
there.
model
we are part
showed
of the,
that the counties up there certainly contribute at a much, much higher rate than down here.
all of Charleston County certainly enjoys our beaches, certainly uses them all the time. We have the people that have formed, all kinds of groups to say that it's their God-given right to be here, so.
We've wondered if that sell would be a little bit easier than the
Than the state.
than the
Well,
state sale,
but
which is
I mean,
so
that's a
hard.
great point, but I think that it's why we have to have numbers. Just to go and say we need help is one thing. To explain to them, this is what we can do, this is what it's gonna cost us, we need help now. It makes a lot more sense, and I think we can sell it better.
Yeah.
If
Scott.
if it's sellable.
Scott?
Yeah, I just want to kind of circle back to, I think, the beginning and Andrew and Cindy's and everybody's comments. I think before we price anything out, don't we have to kind of document what it is what's the beach going to look like? Because what our objectives are and what this plan is trying to accomplish and how often and to keep it sustainable, that's going to drive the numbers. And without that, I think I don't know what we're pricing out. I mean, I can't
I think that's what
fathom
I talked.
we all have different views of what the beach should or could look like, and then it gets back to that formula.
Yeah, I mean, I
Can-
think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I
As-
think that's not, and I think that we're gonna have to be prepared. I think that anyone who looks at it is going to say there's going to be a short-term bump in order to get through some of the things, to get things more stable, and then the maintenance and all is going to be better, and we're gonna need help on prioritizing, like, we're in an unexpected situation, and now where's the priority, what needs to be done now, so, again, I just think we're gonna need to know, and that's gonna be super important. They may say, look, right now you need X million dollars just to get yourself at a baseline, and to get to goal is going to be this, and you're not gonna be able to have it overnight. This isn't Christmas, and how do we get to that point where we're sustainable? And then those plans within themselves may have various, do you want the 3-year, the 5-year, the 7-year plan? What can you afford? But I do feel that it's really hard to go ahead and give a good argument to anyone about helping us if we don't have what we want, why we want it, and what makes us, what makes IOP what IOP is. We only have one hotel, we only have X. We are a residential island here, but we're different there, plus we have a county beach. So I think that all needs to be laid out. And I think it's not a 2-year process by any means, because you said North Carolina has a good handle on what needs to be done, but I think that we may need a consultant to put something together that we then price out, and then we can march forward. And it's also gonna allow some transparency to our community, that we really need to be able to make sure that we're aligned with the vision, and if we have questions about what our vision is, that there's an opportunity for people to discuss that. Because they're not gonna wanna see a $50 million beach project and go, whoa, 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 whoa. They're gonna point fingers that it shouldn't be because, and we need to be able to say, no, this is an equitable situation and it's sustainable and this is why. And the goal is, once we know this and agree to it as a community, that we can start looking to price it out. As Dan brought up, I think earlier, we were all struck by the $12 million savings by having a plan. It's hard, it's not easy. But we do need to know, while this is going on, is a lot of simultaneous, is where do we have it, what is our urgent need, what's our priority, and how is it determined right now? And I think there's a lot of understandable chatter as to what it is and why. Does Breach Inlet need to be dredged? That's the number one question that I hear, is why aren't we dredging Breach Inlet and getting sand from there? We need to know, do we need to do that? And we need to be able to answer that to the community, I think, is yay or nay. Is it a yay, it needs to be done, and is a funding and permitting issue, or is it we all think it needs to be done, but we got experts look at it and it doesn't? I think those are some of the things we need to be responding while we're putting this together too. Just FYI. Cindy's thoughts for the day.
They're great.
No, I wanted to follow up on what Scott said, because I've been thinking it the whole time as we've been talking. We've talked a lot of tactics and strategy. The one thing we haven't talked about is, what is our operational outcome? What do we want the beach to look like? And that drives everything. That drives the costs, that drives the strategy we use, and the timelines, everything like that. Until we define what we want the beach to look like, and what's the depth of it, the length of it, we can't create any other model. We have strategies and frameworks to use, but until we've defined that goal, we can't go anywhere else. That has to be defined first.
Can we bring CSE back next week
Well, yeah.
and go there?
I was
Can
gonna
that
say,
be-
you're gonna need a consultant to
Yeah,
have
we
a
have-
conversation.
Yeah.
Can
Well,
we
and
do
the other
that?
part of that,
we have the engineer that
Yeah,
is out here all the time, and
And then-
can he come to the next meeting, and
We can
can that
ask.
be our topic for the next meeting?
yeah, and then we define, what does a healthy beach look to us, and what's that outcome? Okay, so if that's the operational outcome, then what's the strategy to employ that across the whole beachfront of the island? Then from there, we go into tactics about funding and the timelines and who we partner with. Those tactics have to come last. We've talked a lot about them. We've talked about a little bit of strategy, but without that operational outcome of what we're looking for, the rest of it doesn't matter. We're jumping too far around.
and
That's
is
it.
is it tiered? In other words, if we want, this much beach, do we do part of it in the first project and part in the second, and slowly add on, so we don't pay for it all at once?
Right.
Which would reduce it down, and if we tier it, does that make sense, and how do we do it?
Yeah, Cindy?
And I wanted to point out from what Tim's article had provided, the reason that I brought up what do we want in the beach, that I keep saying consultant, and I hate to be, someone smarter than me, how's that? Who can look at it and say, like, they defined it as if you have 50 yards of beach, the property values go up this much, therefore your tax base goes up this much, therefore there's a breaking point of what you can afford to re-nourish based on how much you're gonna re-nourish, and some of it goes back to the economics of your tax base, which is, so again, it's just things that, I don't think it's what our engineer regarding a healthy beach can actually do. It's gonna take somebody who's got maybe a team who plugs these numbers in and says, if we do this, it's gonna cost this, but it's going to result in that. Or if tourism will go up and it puts it all together. And that's why I keep using the word consultant, because it's not just a healthy beach, it's a healthy economy.
Yeah, I would say too, echoing almost everyone's comments, is it's going to be defining what our beach looks like is really what Philip said, I think, at one point too, is what we can realistically expect to hold on to during these cycles. Like, I would love, like Katie said, 200 yards, but if a consultant or an engineer comes in here and says, look, the best you can hope for in a 5-year cycle or a 7-year cycle or 3 years, however they tier that out, is 75 feet, then maybe that's what our beach looks like, even though some people would like more and some people would just like it to do whatever it's going to do naturally, and maybe sometimes we don't even have one. But, we need a realistic goal that is uniform, and maybe it isn't uniform. It might not be uniform in unstabilized inlet zones versus stabilized beach stretches. So absolutely, whatever we call it, consultant, people smarter than me and Cindy, and maybe it's Stephen, I don't know, but yeah.
Well, and I think, so maybe next step, Desiree, Stephen is great and has the history of our island for sure, which is a lot of benefit to that. Maybe we bring him in next week and start trying to define what a healthy beach looks like on a vision, on a wish list, on an ongoing basis. And then, I think just an honest conversation with Stephen, do you really need to keep your eye on the ball on the day-to-day and let us go find somebody else to take care of this kind of broader, bigger picture piece? I mean, I don't know, in conjunction with Stephen, he would obviously have to weigh in, but do we need somebody else to really take the strategic piece and let him stay focused on the day-to-day? It's a question for him.
Yeah, I feel like if we can start with Stephen and he might,
Agreed.
and he may also tell us that he knows someone who would be the perfect person for this, or, I just feel
Or is
like.
involved in Dare County.
Right,
or, yeah.
right. I kind of feel like that's.
Can we find out who Dare used? They
Yeah.
had somebody that's already been through this and plowed this field already.
Agreed.
Yeah, we have that contact, and I agree. I think that we could have a conversation with Stephen. His plate may
Just
be
to start
already
it.
full
Yeah.
with what he's already working for us, and maybe a good opportunity to bring in somebody to work with them, leverage all the knowledge and resources that they have, and maybe help on this broader level along with them.
Yeah.
If you have the guy from Dare County, why don't we maybe think about bringing that person in if he's wanting to talk to us?
Well,
They're a consultant?
They're a
CSE
consultant,
did
yeah.
Dare County
Yeah.
renourishment plan.
Yeah.
They-
CSE did that.
Okay.
They also worked with another engineer, so I think that they have a group
So it's
that
already
they
in
work
the-
with multiple
okay.
people.
And one more thing for like moving forward steps, and I keep going back to Sullivan's because people keep talking about dredging Breach Inlet, and there is an island south of Breach Inlet. I think we maybe need to have someone from Sullivan. I mean, maybe we need to have them at a meeting. I feel like we keep talking around this whole Sullivan's Island thing, and like they're kind of important. For the south end especially.
And we can have, we are asking Stephen to come next week to talk about, what are the ideal beach would look like. We can talk about this, the dredge breach inlet idea, and we've had him before City Council answering those questions before. I think it would be a good opportunity to discuss what opportunities they are, if there's anything that's more feasible and more attainable than that, and what are the pros and cons of moving down that direction.
And you said Nicole is there
Nicole
ongoing?
Elko,
Yeah.
so we can see if maybe she
Yeah.
could come as well. We could have a two-tier conversation.
Yeah, because I
with
think she
them.
would represent Sullivan's
Yeah.
more than a staff level would. Is committee okay with getting Stephen for next time and/or Nicole, just to kind of start defining what Healthy Beach looks like, what do you call it in your military talk?
Operational.
Operational
What's your outcome?
objective.
What's the overall
That.
outcome of the goal of
So
the project?
committee okay with that? That's kind of next step, and is next Friday good, or do you want to take a break, or?
Sure. Friday's good.
Yeah, Friday works.
Let's get
I
going.
guess we probably, if Stephen's our primary objective, we
true.
should probably find out if he's,
He's probably going to be here anyway. So, yeah, so I think to
it
Katie's
looks like
point,
the tides are supposed to be pretty low for the next little while. so
except for this
that's something.
weekend.
So we have,
This
we
weekend.
we
After-
anticipate
after
high
we get-
tides on Saturday. However, the winds are moving offshore, so I think we don't anticipate
Yeah, it shouldn't be
Higher
that bad.
than
higher
stated.
than what's been predicted. So, yeah, we have our eye on it.
Yeah, so I think to Katie's point, let us see if Steven's available and maybe Nicole, and then we'll confirm for next Friday. Is that fair?
It's only 5.
No further business, 10 o'clock. Motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned.